Agatha Hawthorne and her seemingly perfect suburban neighbors appeared to live ordinary, quiet lives, but behind the lace curtains and manicured lawns, a dark obsession had been growing for decades, and what she did next would shock an entire community. In the quiet suburb of Maplewood, life moved at a gentle pace. The streets were lined with neatly trimmed hedges, rows of identical houses, and sidewalks where children rode bicycles under the watchful eyes of parents sipping coffee on their porches. The community prided itself on being safe, friendly, and predictable. Most mornings, the air was filled with the sound of birds chirping and distant lawn mowers. On weekends, families gathered for barbecues, neighbors exchanged pleasantries over fences, and the occasional delivery driver carried packages along the tree-lined roads. Everything seemed normal, almost idyllic. Yet, among the familiar faces and routine comings and goings, there was one house that stood out, not because it was particularly beautiful or well-kept, but because of the woman who lived there. Agatha Hawthorne was well into her late 70s. She had silver hair pulled tightly into a bun and eyes that seemed to miss nothing, sharp and calculating, like someone who had spent a lifetime studying the world without ever letting it study her back. She rarely left her home except for brief walks at odd hours, usually when the streets were empty, and she moved with a quiet determination that made neighbors uneasy. While most elderly residents were known for warm smiles, freshly baked cookies, or stories from their youth, Agatha seemed to cultivate an aura of distance. Mail would occasionally pile up on her porch, then disappear. Packages left at her doorstep vanished before anyone could ask her about them. Some nights, neighbors reported strange noises, soft thuds, the sound of furniture being moved, or low, indecipherable murmurs that seemed to come from inside her house. People whispered about it behind closed doors, but few ever confronted her directly. Despite these oddities, Agatha maintained the outward appearance of normalcy. She tended her garden with obsessive care, pruning bushes and mowing the lawn with meticulous precision. Her house never looked abandoned or messy. On the surface, she was just another member of the neighborhood, a quiet presence that rarely drew attention. Yet, there was something unnerving about the way she observed the world. Windows were always curtained, but sometimes a flicker of movement would be glimpsed at odd hours. A shadow would pass behind lace drapes, or the faint glint of eyes would appear briefly before vanishing. Children were subtly warned to stay away, and adults found themselves instinctively keeping their distance. For years, the incidents were minor, almost laughable: a misplaced bicycle, a missing package, or the occasional lost cat. But the pattern was undeniable. It was always near Agatha's house, always leaving a trail that stopped abruptly at her doorstep. The quiet suburb, once so predictable, began to carry an undercurrent of unease. Neighbors started to notice each other's behaviors more closely, wondering if anyone else had fallen victim to the strange occurrences. They avoided walking too close to her property and sometimes hurried along the sidewalks, pretending not to notice her watchful eyes. Despite this growing suspicion, no one could prove anything. There were no clear signs of wrongdoing, only whispers and uneasy glances. Agatha seemed untouchable, a presence both familiar and frightening, quietly reminding everyone that even in the most peaceful of neighborhoods, something dark could lurk just behind a perfectly trimmed hedge. It began with small, seemingly insignificant incidents that most people would have shrugged off as coincidence. A bicycle left in the driveway disappeared overnight. A neighbor's mail went missing, only to turn up days later in the park across the street. A family reported their dog had vanished, only to be found wandering a few blocks away, unharmed but clearly distressed. At first, residents assumed these were petty thefts or simple mistakes. Children sometimes borrowed bikes without asking, mail carriers misdelivered packages, and pets wandered off. But as the weeks went by, a pattern became impossible to ignore. Every incident had some connection to Agatha Hawthorne's house. The trail always seemed to lead there, yet no one ever saw her take anything, and nothing could be pinned on her directly. The neighborhood's unease grew as the incidents became more frequent and brazen. Packages left in plain sight on porches vanished within hours. Personal items from neighbors' yards were reported missing. Even small objects from inside homes seemed to disappear under mysterious circumstances. Residents began sharing stories at casual gatherings, piecing together a picture that was increasingly unsettling. It was not just the theft itself, but the precision, the timing, and the fact that Agatha never seemed to be caught. She had an uncanny ability to appear in public at the right time to maintain her innocence. If a neighbor went missing or an item was stolen, she might be seen walking her dog down the street, visiting a friend, or running errands, always providing herself with a perfect alibi. Rumors began circulating about shadowy figures moving at night, and a few neighbors claimed to have glimpsed someone lurking near the edge of the property in the darkness. Security cameras installed by wary residents recorded movement, but often it was inconclusive, blurred shapes, fleeting shadows, a silhouette moving cautiously across the lawn. People expected a young thief or an intruder from outside the neighborhood, but the movements were deliberate, slow, and oddly familiar, the kind of motions one might expect from someone used to observing the area for years. The idea that an elderly woman could be behind all of it seemed absurd at first. Yet the closer residents looked at the evidence, the more they realized that age could conceal a level of cunning that went unnoticed. Local authorities were called in, and officers began to investigate. They questioned neighbors, reviewed camera footage, and tracked patterns in the incidents, but every lead ran cold near Agatha's property. Her alibis were airtight, and there were no witnesses to directly implicate her. Still, detectives could not ignore the recurring link to her house. Something about the way incidents clustered in her immediate vicinity suggested more than coincidence. The tension in the neighborhood reached a tipping point when multiple incidents occurred in a single week. A neighbor's cat disappeared, a package of expensive electronics vanished, and a family reported items stolen from their garage. Each time, Agatha appeared in public at the most convenient moments, always polite, always calm, never giving a hint of suspicion. The quiet suburb that had once seemed safe and predictable now carried an underlying fear. Residents became cautious, watching their surroundings and avoiding unnecessary contact. It was a subtle, creeping dread, the realization that someone they thought was harmless might be quietly orchestrating chaos. The question hung in the air: how far would this go before the truth came to light, and what did Agatha Hawthorne truly have planned? The turning point came unexpectedly, in the form of routine maintenance. A contractor had been hired to repair a leaky pipe in the basement of Agatha Hawthorne's home. The house, like the woman herself, appeared ordinary on the surface. The floors were polished, furniture neatly arranged, and walls adorned with paintings of landscapes that gave a sense of normalcy. Yet, as the contractor moved through the basement, he noticed something unusual: a section of wall that seemed slightly out of place. It was a subtle misalignment, easy to miss unless one was paying attention. Curiosity got the better of him, and with careful effort, he pried open what turned out to be a hidden door. Behind it, a narrow staircase descended into darkness, a space that Agatha had clearly intended to remain secret. As he descended, the contractor's flashlight revealed a room that defied expectations. The air was cool and heavy, filled with the faint smell of dust and old paper. Shelves lined the walls, but they were not filled with the usual tools or storage items one might expect in a basement. Instead, there were objects that had been reported missing from various homes across the neighborhood. A bicycle frame leaned against the wall, a set of expensive gardening tools sat on a shelf, and a collection of small electronics was meticulously organized in labeled boxes. Each item seemed carefully cataloged, as though someone had spent months, if not years, planning and collecting them. The scale of the room was shocking. This was no simple hobby or coincidence. In addition to the objects themselves, there were journals, lists, and photographs. The pages were filled with notes about neighbors, their routines, and their habits. There were diagrams showing the layout of nearby homes, the locations of entrances, and even the times when families were most likely to be away. Every detail was recorded with painstaking precision, suggesting a level of observation that went far beyond casual curiosity. Whoever had created this space had been watching the neighborhood for a long time, learning patterns and anticipating actions. The contractor felt a growing sense of unease as he realized the implications. This was not just a collection of stolen items. It was a meticulously constructed system designed to monitor and control the lives of others. The contractor immediately left the house and contacted the authorities. When police arrived, the scale of the discovery became even more apparent. The hidden room contained hundreds of items, all linked to incidents that had previously baffled the community. More disturbing were the lists and photographs, which indicated that the person responsible had a deep fascination with the people around them. The investigation revealed that Agatha Hawthorne had been living a double life. By day, she was a quiet, unassuming neighbor, the kind of woman one might hardly notice. By night, she meticulously observed, documented, and collected from those around her, creating a private world that mirrored the lives of her neighbors but twisted by her obsession. The revelation sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. Residents struggled to reconcile the polite, frail woman they had known for years with the methodical, calculating figure revealed by the hidden room. The scope of her activities raised questions about how long this had been going on, what she had intended, and how many incidents had gone unnoticed. The basement had exposed not only the stolen items, but also the chilling extent of her surveillance, proving that appearances could be dangerously deceptive. It became clear that Agatha Hawthorne's quiet exterior masked a complex and disturbing mind, one that had quietly controlled the neighborhood from the shadows for years. When the police finally obtained a search warrant and entered Agatha Hawthorne's hidden room themselves, the reality of the situation became undeniable. The air was thick, people with tension, as officers carefully moved through the space, their flashlights cutting through the dim, musty light. Every shelf, every box, and every carefully labeled container told a story of meticulous observation and control. Items once thought lost were here, perfectly preserved, cataloged with dates and locations. Small electronics, jewelry, bicycles, and personal belongings of neighbors all sat in order, as though Agatha had been curating a private museum of other people's lives. The sheer volume of possessions suggested this had been happening for years, yet there was more lurking beneath the surface. Officers discovered journals filled with entries that went beyond simple record-keeping. Agatha had documented patterns of behavior, noting when families left for work or school, which doors were easiest to enter, and even the pets each household owned. She had written detailed observations about conversations she had overheard and habits she had noted from afar. Maps of the neighborhood were pinned to walls with lines connecting houses and routes, creating a visual web of her influence and knowledge. At first, it seemed like an obsession limited to theft, but then the notes took a darker turn. Some entries suggested planned specific actions aimed at manipulating or endangering neighbors. The thought that someone so seemingly frail could maintain this level of control over a community was deeply unsettling. In a locked drawer tucked beneath a shelf, investigators made their most shocking discovery. Inside were documents and objects that pointed to far more than a series of petty thefts. There were photographs of neighbors in their homes, detailed accounts of when they were alone, and lists of routines suggesting long-term monitoring. It became apparent that Agatha had been planning something that went beyond taking possessions. The scale of her planning indicated a mind capable of considerable calculation and secrecy. Every detail was carefully considered, from timing to accessibility, creating a chilling impression of premeditation. The thought of what might have happened if her plans had been carried out sent a ripple of fear through the investigators. Further inspection revealed that Agatha's activities were not limited to physical items. She had kept a collection of letters, some never sent, addressed to neighbors or authorities, filled with threats, veiled warnings, and manipulative content. She had constructed a narrative in which she controlled the neighborhood, and every item, note, and observation reinforced her sense of power. The hidden room was more than a storage space. It was a manifestation of her obsession, a carefully maintained ecosystem where she alone dictated the rules. It was clear that she had spent decades perfecting her surveillance, learning every nuance of her neighbors' lives and hiding it in plain sight behind the facade of an ordinary elderly woman. The realization that this quiet, unassuming neighbor had managed to manipulate and observe an entire community without detection stunned both authorities and the residents when news of the discovery spread. Agatha Hawthorne was no longer just a peculiar figure in a quiet suburb. She had become a symbol of hidden danger, a reminder that appearances can be deceiving. The neighborhood's sense of security was shattered as the true extent of her activities emerged, and everyone was left to confront the unnerving truth. For years, they had lived next to someone whose mind harbored a level of obsession and control they had never imagined possible. Agatha Hawthorne was arrested quietly, without the spectacle that the neighborhood might have expected. Officers led her from the house with calm precision, a frail figure who, in appearance, seemed incapable of the meticulous and obsessive activities revealed behind closed doors. The community, however, was anything but calm. News of the hidden room and the disturbing discoveries spread quickly. First through whispered conversations between neighbors, then through calls to local news outlets. The quiet streets of Maplewood, once filled with casual greetings and friendly smiles, were now shadowed by fear and disbelief. Families locked doors more carefully, installed security cameras, and began watching each other with cautious attention, unsure who had been affected by Agatha's years of observation. The fallout was immediate and far-reaching. Residents who had felt safe in the predictability of their routines realized that their privacy had been violated in the most intimate of ways. Even the smallest gestures, walking a dog, leaving a package on a porch, taking a child to school, now carried a sense of exposure. Some neighbors found objects missing from their homes that had not been reported before, while others discovered notes or diagrams they had never noticed tucked away in the hidden room. The psychological impact was profound, as people struggled to reconcile the polite, elderly neighbor they had known for years with the calculating presence that had been silently monitoring their lives. Authorities worked quickly to catalog the evidence, returning items to their rightful owners where possible. Each recovered object was a reminder of Agatha's meticulous planning and her ability to control the narrative of the neighborhood. Investigators pieced together timelines, connecting stolen items and personal information to the journals and maps found in the hidden room. It became clear that this had been a long-term project, not an impulsive or sporadic activity. Agatha had dedicated herself to maintaining her secret world, carefully crafting her outward appearance to deflect suspicion while quietly collecting, observing, and documenting everything around her. The neighborhood responded in its own way. Community meetings were held to discuss safety measures, and a sense of solidarity emerged among residents who had shared similar experiences. Parents walked children to school in groups, neighbors exchanged tips about security systems, and the once complacent streets became places of vigilance. Even small acts of routine, like taking the trash out or checking the mail, were approached with caution. The sense of normalcy that Maplewood had relied on was gone, replaced by an acute awareness of how easily trust could be manipulated. In the months that followed, Agatha's case became a cautionary tale. Stories circulated in nearby towns and online, emphasizing that appearances could be deceiving and that danger could reside behind the most ordinary of facades. Psychologists and criminologists studied her behavior, noting the combination of obsession, meticulous planning, and the ability to conceal criminal activity within a seemingly mundane life. Maplewood slowly began to heal, but the lessons lingered. Residents remained vigilant, understanding that safety required more than trust and good intentions. The quiet streets continued to hold a sense of unease, a subtle reminder that even the most familiar neighbors could harbor secrets capable of shattering a community's sense of security. Agatha Hawthorne, once merely a peculiar figure in a suburban neighborhood, had become an enduring symbol of hidden danger, a story of obsession and control that no one in Maplewood would ever forget.